Berlin, March 1974. A single cable lands on a Mossad desk. It carries one instruction: process Cipher 72. Analysts work in shifts, machines run hot, but nothing fits. The code looks random, like noise, yet repeats just enough to feel intentional. There is only one pattern left to test: the mind of a Soviet chess grandmaster who has not played a public game in years. Each move he makes will silently rewrite kill orders he will never see. If he fails to solve the puzzle inside his own game, ministers across Europe die. This is Operation Black Bishop. Alexei Morozov entered the Cold War story far from any border or embassy. He was born in 1942 in Novosibirsk, a city designed by planners and hardened by winter. His parents were factory workers who treated conversation as a risk, not a comfort. At 9, during an air raid drill, a clerk miscounted heads and locked the basement door with him still inside. The lights failed. Dust fell from the ceiling with each distant impact. Alexei did not scream or hammer the door. He closed his eyes and began replaying a chess game he had seen once in a newspaper, move by move, piece by piece. When he finished that game, he started another. By the time a teacher opened the door hours later, he had built an internal world where danger meant calculation, not panic. By age 22, Alexei had become a Soviet grandmaster. He was not the most charismatic nor the most political, but he saw patterns others missed. Opponents said he played as if he could see 4 boards at once. Soviet handlers called him the man who calculates ghosts, a label that both flattered and isolated him. Tournament victories brought him to Moscow, then to foreign travel, then into contact with officials who wanted his fame but not his opinions. The capability that made him valuable was simple to describe and difficult to replicate. Under pressure that broke other minds, his thinking became clearer, not slower. Colleagues described him as calm, never complacent. He could hold entire games in his head and test variations the way others tested memories. That gave him a rare talent. He could recognize human-designed complexity pretending to be chaos. In chess, that meant finding hidden combinations. In cryptology, it meant something far more dangerous. His fall from public life began with a small act of defiance. After a narrow win in Belgrade, a party handler ordered him to lose the next game for political optics. Alexei refused. The refusal did not make headlines, but it did enter a file. Over the next year, invitations dried up. By 1969, he had vanished from official tournaments, resurfacing only in underground chess circles and informal gatherings in smoky apartments. Intelligence services on both sides tracked him for years as a peripheral asset. According to one later debrief from a European liaison officer, Western agencies saw him as potentially significant, but strategically dormant. Mossad analysts logged his name in several reports, more as a curiosity than a target. That changed when Cipher 72 arrived. Cipher 72 did not behave like a product of conventional mathematics. It resisted frequency analysis, resisted pattern extraction, and resisted brute force machine testing. What it did resemble, according to a technical note from Mossad's signals branch, was a deep positional game constructed by a mind that understood both randomness and the appearance of randomness. The working assessment was direct. A human, not a machine, had built it. The guiding doctrine that emerged around this problem was called cognitive asymmetry theory. The logic was straightforward. If an adversary encrypts using human intuition, only superior intuition can break it. Machines would fail because they searched in the wrong space. The cipher had to be treated as a game, with rules that existed only in the designer's mind. Mossad called the approach the asymmetric decoding strategy. Instead of attacking the numbers, they would attack the mindset behind them. Each sequence of symbols in Cipher 72 would be translated into a chess position, locked to specific coordinates and piece values. A Grandmaster would not break a code. He would solve a problem on a board. His solutions would map back to routes, dates, and kill orders. He would never see what he had truly done. 3 obstacles made this plan look impossible at first review. The first was extraction without extraction. Alexei could not be moved to Israel or any visible Mossad facility without triggering Soviet suspicion. The second was deception stability. The legend required him to believe he was testing a Soviet supercomputer, a project given the designation Model 5-3. Any hint of human intervention would collapse trust. The third was the 72-hour kill window. Each unsolved line of Cipher 72 represented an assassination already in motion, with only hours of lead time. Despite these constraints, planners saw one opportunity. Alexei's enforced isolation had left him hungry for relevance and for serious competition. Soviet authorities wanted to keep him quiet, but also useful. A secretive artificial intelligence test, framed as patriotic work for a classified research institute, would appeal to both sides. Within 3 weeks of the first Cipher 72 cable, all elements of the deception architecture would be in motion. But first, one critical element needed to be resolved. Who would sit across from Alexei, unseen, and turn his moves into life or death decisions? The answer was Unit K-12, a small team within Mossad's operations branch. Its members worked under call signs, not names. Orion handled overall coordination and legend control. Sparrow ran external surveillance and liaison with Austrian security. Delta 9 managed technical integration, including the most sensitive element, the year simulated behavior of the non-existent supercomputer. For the duration of the mission, Orion would pose as the director of a front organization in Vienna, the Institute for Computational Futures. During the second week of planning, Orion experienced what case officers call legend drift. He spent long days rehearsing his role as a retired IBM engineer, reviewing actual documentation for the IBM System/370/145 mainframe to make his cover story credible under questioning. At night, alone in a small, safe flat near the Danube, he found himself thinking about the fictional institute's finances, its imaginary staff, its non-existent research output. The false identity began to feel more structured than his real life, which at that moment consisted of secure calls, coded cables, and waiting. In a brief psychological consult conducted by a support officer and summarized in an internal memo, Orion admitted that the legend felt cleaner and more purposeful than his own history. The assessment was calm but blunt. Sustained legend use, combined with high-stakes deception of a civilian, increased the risk of empathy conflicts. The memo concluded that Orion remained fit for duty, with one caveat. He was instructed to treat every interaction with Alexei as an operational parameter, not a personal relationship. The mission could not afford hesitation. Alexei's own humanity surfaced in the files in a different way. According to an intercepted letter to his sister in Leningrad, dated January 1974, he spent his evenings teaching chess to neighborhood children and sending small sums of money to a niece studying music. He wrote about the sound of her practice pieces more than about politics. Analysts who read the translation marked no operational value. Months later, when Vienna entered his life without warning, that same niece would find her uncle even quieter, unaware that his decisions had kept several European leaders alive. By late March 1974, The operation left the planning rooms and entered execution. A second fragment of Cipher 72 arrived, tagged 72-Bravo, Rhine sector. Embedded in its structure was a reference to a Western minister. For senior decision-makers, that detail shifted the mission from theoretical to urgent. The authorization to move on Operation Black Bishop came in the final week of March. The window was now measured not in weeks, but in hours. The architecture of Operation Black Bishop began with place, not people. Mossad selected a narrow building on a side street in Vienna's 9th district. The upper floors already housed a small trade office that asked few questions about its neighbors. The second floor was leased under a Swiss shell company. Inside, carpenters and technicians transformed the space into Station Winterglass, a covert site disguised as the Institute for Computational Futures. The documents backing the institute were handcrafted at desk level and in embassy channels. There were forged Soviet funding letters printed on period-correct paper, carrying the header of a fictional AI directorate within a real ministry. There were conference invitations with plausible typographical errors, stamped and backdated. A directive labeled 7-4 Delta established the Institute's role as a cooperative facility for Eastern and Western research in machine intelligence. The legend was built to withstand casual verification and shallow suspicion, not a full counterintelligence audit. That matched the expected level of scrutiny. Equipment was selected to look impressive, not necessarily to function as claimed. In the main laboratory, Delta 9 installed racks with decommissioned circuit boards, an old IBM console panel with blinking indicator lights, and a cluster of tape drives salvaged from a European partner's storage. The heart of the deception, however, was a simple wooden chessboard, 53 centimeters square. It had no maker's stamp. Technicians custom sanded the edges to remove identifiable markings. Beneath the board, 26-gauge wiring ran to a relay room next door, where analysts would sit behind a one-way partition. Communication between the board and Cipher 72 happened in stages. Each move Alexei played would be read aloud by an observer, encoded on a secure line to a signal cell, and matched against a pre-built library of cipher positions. The analysts used a standard set of chess notation overlays to track branching paths. A small Nagra IV-S tape recorder ran continuously as a backup, capturing every spoken move call. For outward appearance, a delay protocol created the illusion of machine thinking. If Alexei moved too quickly, a scripted message appeared on a wall-mounted display, simulating processing. The delay threshold was set at 11 seconds. Less than that felt human. More than that risked frustration. Within that window, Delta 9 could make minor adjustments, reroute cipher segments, and correct for misalignment. The technical complexity sat behind static walls. The interface Alexei would see was simple: a board, a chair, and a screen. Escape and exfiltration routes were plotted with equal care. Sparrow mapped 3 paths from Station Winterglass to safe apartments and rendezvous points. One route used a rear stairwell into a courtyard shared with a bakery, then a service alley leading toward the Ringstrasse. Another crossed through an underground car park whose entrance sat within sight of a tram stop, offering rapid dispersal. A final, last resort option used the roof and a neighboring fire escape. All routes ended at vehicles with false plates and diplomatic covers, or at secure locations tied to friendly services. The team itself was compartmented. Surveillance specialists monitored the building exterior and the approach streets, logging any repeat presence. A small liaison cell maintained contact with Austrian security, framing the institute as a low-interest research tenant. Inside Station Winterglass, only 3 people would ever share the room with Alexei: Orion in his role as institute director, a local hire assistant who believed the work was routine data collection, and a technician to manage the supercomputer. None of them, except Orion, knew the full stakes. Each analyst in the relay room saw only their slice of Cipher 72 and the mapping to chess positions. If any one fragment leaked, it would describe only an eccentric research project, not an active assassination network. Planning consumed 4 weeks. By late March 1974, the furniture was in place, the wiring had been tested, and the first dry run, using a friendly Grandmaster under another pretext, had revealed small timing problems that were corrected. Unit K-12 had less than 72 hours from the moment Alexei accepted the invitation to the probable activation of the first kill order. The operation moved to the approach phase. The first contact with Alexei did not come from Israel or Austria. It originated from a Soviet cultural attaché in Prague, an unwitting intermediary. Mossad had seeded the bureaucratic pipeline with a forged request, written in dry ministerial language, inviting Alexei to participate in a closed evaluation of advanced computational analysis tools. Travel, payment, and discretion would be provided. Participation would be recorded only in restricted files, safe from public scrutiny. On the surface, the offer matched his situation. He was a sidelined asset, too valuable to discard entirely, too inconvenient to display. But Alexei understood risk. For 2 weeks, he ignored the letter. Then he sent a reply through official channels, framed as a simple question. Who else would be present? And what exactly would the machine do? The answer, written by Orion and translated into bureaucratic Russian, emphasized patriotism and secrecy. No other names. No published results. The machine, called Model 5-3, would test the limits of human calculation in support of national research priorities. Alexei agreed. His agreement started a separate clock. According to one internal Mossad cable, the window from acceptance to the first suspected assassination in Cipher 72 had narrowed to 58 hours. Airline schedules and diplomatic cover constraints reduced usable time further. The countdown was no longer theoretical. Every missed connection, every delay at a border, could translate directly into an undefended target. Vienna received him on a gray afternoon in late March. His Aeroflot flight landed at Checkmate under a thin overcast. Sparrow watched from a distance as Alexei stepped onto the tarmac in a worn coat, carrying a single small case. He moved with the careful posture of someone used to scrutiny, looking neither hurried nor hesitant. A local Soviet official met him at the gate. The car that collected both men belonged to a cutout company, not an embassy. It drove them into the city, then left him at a modest hotel within walking distance of Station Winterglass. That same evening, Orion staged the first controlled failure. When Alexei arrived at the Institute for an introductory tour, a system malfunction message appeared on the main display. A technician apologized in halting Russian. Orion, in fluent German with an accent matching his cover as a Swiss-trained engineer, explained through an interpreter that the hardware had tripped a thermal limit and needed recalibration. In practice, the halt minimized unnecessary conversation. Alexei saw the racks, the cables, the heavy console labeled with IBM markings. He did not see the analysts behind the wall. Over the next 12 hours, Unit K-12 watched him indirectly. Sparrow logged his movements from the hotel to a cafe and back. The surveillance notes describe him eating alone, reading a German chess magazine he did not seem to enjoy, and walking precise square patterns on the sidewalk as if mapping the space. The vulnerability window opened when he returned to the Institute the following morning and entered the V-3 room alone, under controlled conditions. At the front of the room, a simple instruction glowed on a monochrome monitor. Session 1. State Readiness. Alexei sat. He looked at the empty chair opposite him, then at the chessboard. It was centered on a plain table, pieces aligned in starting position. There was no human opponent to study. His eyes moved to the camera dome in the corner ceiling, then to the cable bundle entering the wall. After a short pause, he spoke. "Ready?" he said, in Russian. The word triggered the session. What he did not know was simple. Nothing he was about to face came from a machine. Cipher fragment 72-Bravo, tagged Rhine sector in Mossad files, entered the pipeline as he reached for the king's pawn. His first move, pawn to king 4, opened the decryption stream. Analysts in the relay room mapped it to the first branch in the cipher tree. Each subsequent move moved them through a conceptual maze built by a KGB cryptologic designer who had himself been a strong chess player. Early sessions were calibration. Unit K-12 needed to gauge his style under this artificial condition. Alexei probed the machine with offbeat openings, then with classical ones, watching how long the screen took to update each reply. Delta 9 used the delay protocol aggressively, inserting messages like processing variant 3 to reinforce the illusion of computational depth. The scripted randomness system included pre-written thought lines in Russian, such as evaluating long-term material imbalance. They appeared intermittently, mimicking the output of a verbose diagnostic mode. There were complications. On the second day, a cleaner arrived at Station Winterglass 3 hours ahead of schedule, trying to access the V-3 room during a short break. Sparrow intercepted her in the hallway with a fabricated safety explanation about electromagnetic exposure. The incident lasted less than 60 seconds, but underscored the fragility of the deception. One stray interaction could introduce a comment, a glance, a human slip that would break the frame around Alexei's experience. The core of the operation narrowed around a specific time marker. At T-minus 44 hours, relative to the estimated activation of the first major kill order, Alexei began his third deep session. By then, he had accepted the idea that the machine was not simply generating moves, but testing him. His notes, written in small script during breaks, included the line, "It plays like a man, trying not to be a man." During that third session, a sequence of cipher coordinates presented itself to the analysts as a forced mate pattern in 12 moves. If Alexei chose the wrong branch, the decoding algorithm would map assassins to the wrong city. The specific consequence in operational terms was clear. A diplomat in Brussels, identified in separate intelligence as a likely target, would remain unprotected. The path to the correct safe house in Antwerp depended entirely on his perception of the board. Midway through the sequence, Alexei paused. For the first time, he pushed his chair back slightly and looked not at the pieces, but at the screen. The current computer move, relayed from analysts trying to stay within the narrow search tree, had a particular elegance. It sacrificed a minor piece to create long-term pressure. In human terms, it was beautiful. In machine terms, it was suspicious. He spoke aloud in Russian. No machine chooses this without vanity. In the relay room, Delta 9 heard the line through a monitor speaker. The risk was immediate. If Alexei concluded that humans sat behind the machine, he might begin to test them instead of playing naturally. The pattern of his moves would shift. Confidence in the mapping between chess lines and cipher branches would erode. Delta 9 initiated Protocol Glimmer. Over months of preparation, technicians had studied known power irregularities in early Soviet computing labs. One common feature was a brief voltage dip when heavy equipment spooled up or down. To mimic that experience, Station Winterglass had a dedicated relay tied to the lighting circuit in the V-3 room. At a button press, the lights would dim by a small, precise margin for 1.6 seconds, then return. As Alexei studied the board, the room's fluorescent lamps flickered, then stabilized. The monitor displayed a short diagnostic string. Power fluctuation detected, reallocating processing units. The moment passed. Alexei exhaled. To a man who had spent his career around aging Soviet infrastructure, the glitch felt ordinary. Machines failed, lights dimmed, systems recovered. He looked back at the board and nodded once, more to himself than to anyone else. The hesitation broke. He chose the sharpest, most demanding continuation, a line that aligned with the correct cipher path. From that point, the breakthrough unfolded in disciplined steps. At T-minus 29 hours, the analysts completed mapping his chosen sequence to a grid of geographic coordinates and temporal markers. Cross-referenced with fragment tags in Cipher 72. The data pointed not to Brussels, but to a safe house in Antwerp, on a side street near the port. The address aligned with a separate human report of unfamiliar visitors moving in and out at irregular hours. Mossad relayed the decrypted location to European partners through secure channels. Local security services moved in under cover of a routine criminal investigation. According to one later account from a retired Belgian officer, they found weapons, forged documents, and train tickets timed to coincide with a ministerial visit. The arrest report recorded only suspected terrorist activity. No mention was made of the chess game in Vienna that had led them there. While surveillance teams in Antwerp processed suspects and evidence, Alexei remained in his chair at Station Winterglass, starting another session. For him, the clock counted something different. He had been promised that Model Vi-3 would force him into positions he could not solve. So far, he had held his own. Now, fatigue and curiosity mixed. He began to push the limits, selecting risky lines to see if the machine would punish him. Each risk translated into an operational gamble. During the second night, Orion's internal conflict resurfaced. After Alexei left for his hotel, the Institute fell quiet. Orion remained in the V-3 room alone, reviewing the tape of the day's sessions. In the flickering black and white footage, he watched a man in a plain suit lean over a board, unaware that his gestures corresponded to arrests, raid orders, and new security deployments across a continent. The psychological toll was not dramatic, but it was real. Orion had run agents who knew the stakes and accepted them. Here, the primary asset had never consented. In his post-operation debrief, he described a particular moment. Standing in the doorway as Alexei put on his coat, hearing him ask, in neutral tone, whether the machine was enjoying their match. Orion answered in character, speaking about feedback loops and heuristic functions. The truth was simpler. The operation was using a civilian's lifetime of discipline as a weapon, without telling him. The mission, however, did not pause for ethical reflection. At T-minus 7 hours, relative to the last active kill order, Unit K-12 received a final cipher block. It mapped to what analysts identified as Kill Order 19. The pattern was tighter than any previous fragment, with fewer redundant paths. This time, the window for error was nearly zero. On the board, the sequence manifested as a complex middle game position with material roughly equal but with dynamic imbalances. The only winning path, when mapped through the Cipher logic, required a sacrificial queen line. Any more conservative route led to drawn or losing positions, which in Cipher terms meant ambiguity. Ambiguity in turn meant delay. There was no time left to let events clarify themselves. In the V-3 room, Alexei studied the position in silence. His queen stood active but exposed. A series of forcing moves could drive the machine into a cramped defensive posture, at the cost of delivering his most powerful piece into enemy hands. He walked through the line in his head, eyes half closed. The camera recorded small movements of his fingers as he moved invisible pieces on an invisible board in his mind. At that same moment, hundreds of kilometers away, a small cell of operatives prepared to move. Kill Order 19, as reconstructed later, targeted a conference in Bonn. The plan involved multiple shooters, staggered timings, and diversionary devices. Local authorities had only partial information. They knew something was planned. They did not know where to concentrate resources. The missing coordinates sat, encoded, inside the Queen's sacrifice that one man in Vienna had not yet decided to play. Alexei opened his eyes. He reached forward. With a brief shake of his head, as if dismissing a more cautious option, he lifted the Queen and moved it into capture range. The operator in the relay room called out the move. Analysts updated their mapping, tracing the Cipher's internal decision tree as it snapped into alignment. The machine reply, crafted by Delta 9 to maintain the illusion of stubborn resistance, accepted the Queen and tightened the position. From there, the rest of the sequence ran almost automatically. The sacrifice had unlocked hidden strengths in Alexei's position. He pressed his advantage with clinical calm, trading pieces with an eye to the final mating net. 10 minutes later, he delivered Checkmate. In operational terms, that checkmate corresponded to a set of coordinates and time markers that pinpointed a staging flat, a weapons cache, and a fallback route tied to Kill Order 19. Mossad transmitted the decoded data through established channels. German security services, already at heightened alert, shifted teams and vehicles. Within hours, they intercepted the assassins before dawn and seized weapons whose ballistic profiles matched other unsolved attacks. Officially, the arrests came from ongoing investigative work. Unofficially, senior officers were briefed on the role of an unnamed external source. When the final session ended, Alexei did not ask for a rematch. He removed his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and looked at the screen. The monitor displayed a short, pre-written line. Session complete. Data logged. Participant performance exceptional. He nodded once. Tell them, he said, meaning the unseen designers, that they have built something dangerous. Orion smiled in character and promised to forward the comment. No such designers existed. The danger had always come from Alexei himself. Within 24 hours, Alexei was on a return flight. Vienna faded from his immediate memory as a brief assignment, slightly strange, but not alarming. Station Winterglass dismantled its most sensitive elements. The chessboard went into a crate, unmarked. The wiring beneath it was stripped and disposed of. The false institute would linger a little longer as a low-profile tenant, then quietly close. Operation Black Bishop had moved from active play to the archive. Discovery did not come with public headlines or dramatic revelations. By early April 1974, European newspapers reported a cluster of routine counterintelligence operations in Antwerp, Bonn, and several smaller cities. Articles noted arrests of suspected extremists, seizures of illegal weapons, and increased police visibility around diplomatic sites. To readers, It looked like a general tightening of security in a tense period of the Cold War. Inside government buildings, the understanding was sharper. By the end of that month, senior officials in at least 3 Western capitals had been briefed that a coordinated wave of assassinations had been disrupted at the last possible moment. Each briefing emphasized different elements: domestic law enforcement in one country, improved information sharing in another. The common factor, mentioned only in closed sessions, was a single external intelligence partner that had provided precise, actionable leads derived from classified sources. Investigations into the dismantled KGB network found enough to prove intent, but little to trace method. Safe houses had been scrubbed with professional discipline. Weapons bore filed serial numbers. Documents used robust cover stories. Every lead that pointed toward Moscow also looped back into dead ends, suggesting a high level of tradecraft. Analysts on both sides of the Iron Curtain concluded that the network had been years in the making. Its sudden unraveling indicated a breach, but the breach's nature remained obscure. Official reactions aligned with the era's script. Western governments issued guarded statements about thwarted plots and the ongoing threat of foreign-backed subversion. Soviet authorities denied involvement in any such operations and issued counter-accusations about Western provocations. The denials were transparent to professionals in the field, but transparency was not the goal. The goal was plausible deniability to domestic audiences and international observers. In that respect, both narratives served their purpose. Strategically, Operation Black Bishop achieved its immediate objectives. Tactically, at least 9 planned assassinations were prevented. Weapons caches were seized. Travel routes were mapped and compromised. Intelligence gained included details on courier systems, safe house selection criteria, and the operational doctrine behind deniable destabilization strikes. Secondary benefits emerged in the following months, as names found in notebooks and address books led to further quiet arrests and defections. The costs were less visible but significant. Diplomatically, the exposure of so many planned attacks hardened attitudes toward the Soviet Union in several European capitals. Back-channel contacts narrowed. Negotiations on unrelated issues slowed or stalled. Moscow, in turn, became more cautious in its external operations, rotating personnel and tightening internal security around cryptologic units. The KGB's Cipher division quietly dissolved the Cipher 72 project, not because its methods were flawed, but because they feared a mole. They did not suspect that the vulnerability had been cognitive, not human in the usual sense. Operationally, the mission revealed a new category of tradecraft: cognitive exploitation of civilian savants. By proving that a reclusive Grandmaster could unknowingly decode a lethal cipher through the simple act of playing chess, Mossad had opened a path others could follow. Within a few years, according to internal discussion papers, Western agencies began exploring similar concepts. Mathematicians, musicians, even skilled video game players would be studied not only for recruitment, but for indirect use as analytical engines. The boundary between professional intelligence work and the unknowing contributions of gifted civilians blurred. For the individuals closest to Operation Black Bishop, the consequences were layered. Alexei returned to his constrained life in the Soviet Union. Officials questioned him briefly about his time in Vienna. His description, an AI stress test in a modest institute, nothing remarkable, matched the forged reports they had already received through their own channels. The episode went into a file and stayed there. He resumed teaching, playing in informal circles, sending small gifts to his niece. He never knew that ministers, officers, and ordinary bystanders owed their lives to his choice to sacrifice a queen in a quiet room. For Orion and Unit K-12, The mission entered training manuals and closed-door lectures as a case study. They had demonstrated that genius becomes a weapon the moment someone learns how to aim it. The internal debate centered not on whether the operation had been effective, it had, but on what it had normalized. One after-action note summarized the calculation coldly. The benefits, in lives saved and networks disrupted, outweighed the moral cost of manipulating an unconsenting mind. Whether that assessment would remain valid over decades as similar operations multiplied was an open question. At the moral level, the paradox remains. Was Alexei Morozov saved from irrelevance, or exploited by forces that saw only the shape of his mind, not the man inside it? From one perspective, his Vienna sessions turned a wasted talent into a shield that protected thousands. The deception spared him from direct involvement in violence, kept his hands literally clean, and may have given him a private sense of challenge he had long missed. From another perspective, he was used. His autonomy was overridden. His history of obedience under pressure was repurposed without consent into a tool of state power. He walked into Station Winterglass, believing he was serving his own country's progress. In reality, his thoughts were driving the failure of his country's clandestine plan. Genius, in that setting, became not a gift, but an exposed nerve to be pressed for strategic advantage. The answer you choose says as much about your worldview as it does about him. If a life-saving operation depends on deceiving one innocent person, does the success justify the theft of their agency? In the case of Operation Black Bishop, both truths stand side by side. A continent stepped back from the edge of a coordinated political crisis. A man went home unchanged on the surface, changed forever in the secret history he never knew he owned. What is your take on that trade? If this story made you question whether genius should be protected or exploited, leave your perspective in the comments and share this briefing with someone who thinks strategy is only about numbers, not minds.